Hey folks, how's it going? It's been a while since I made a video. I'm really excited to be joining you with a few tips and a sneak peek at something I'm working on. The Unity editor most days is a pain in the ass, but I would say of all the game engines I've worked in, Unity is still, I think, one of the easiest to approach and definitely my favorite by a long shot for the kind of games that I've been making recently. And however, there's a lot of ways that I've changed the editor or set up the editor how I like it. Over 5 or 6 years of working in this engine, I've become attuned to a lot of the quirks and stuff, and so I wanted to give you a little bit of a guide on how I use the engine, because maybe if you're new, you might learn something, or even if you're an expert, you might see a different perspective. So let's jump into it. And I wanted to start right here with this menu. It's a little bit hard. I never remember where this setting is, but that's because I set it and then I never have to worry about it again. But it's the auto refresh feature in the preferences. So to get there, you go to, here, I'll pull this up. You go to Edit, Preferences, General Auto Refresh, and I always have that box unchecked. And what that does is it allows you to edit the code, save the code with the game still running. Otherwise, whenever you edit the code and save the code, the game will automatically try to realize those changes. And pretty much always, I have found that it never works. It never gets the changes in to continue working with runtime stuff unless you specifically designed it to. So I hate the default feature of it trying to do that because it just slows down my workflow, because whenever I make a change, I go into Unity and everything's stalling. It's trying to reload everything. So I just turn auto refresh off, and then I have so then the question is, how do I import my script changes? I have a suite of tools that do that. So the first thing that, we'll get to that in just a moment, I wanted to first show you this layout here for my settings. So this is going to be common in basically any game engine you work in. My day job right now, I'm working on Call of Duty, and we have a system where you will set command line arguments basically in order to make incremental changes, and you can set those from within the game. A lot of engines are going to have some sort of support for that. Unity doesn't have one out of the box, but it does have these serialized fields in the form of checkboxes, where if you have a game object here, while it's running, you could check a box here, click a drop down, and see those changes in real time. That's super effective and very important, I think, for anybody's workflow. But another step to that is adding your own customizable, things to tune, basically. You want to expose the parameters in whatever way you can. And it often makes sense to centralize that into one field. And so a lot of people will have something like a settings field, and that's what I've got here. Now, previously, the way that I would design games would be, and I think this is a very straightforward, naive solution, is you would have maybe a game manager script, so something like this, and then you would have all of these elements on the script itself. And so then you'd go to the script and you'd turn it on, turn a feature on and off, whatever, what have you. But there's a few limitations to that. The main one being that it doesn't have cross-scene persistency, and that's very important for when you're making a game with multiple different scenes, because you want to be able to basically edit a value like max health in one scene and have that carry over to the other scenes. So the solution, and you probably already thought of it if you're familiar with these, but scriptable objects has been amazing for me in my development. And that's exactly what this is. So we're looking at a scriptable object visualized in the editor here. And let me see if I could pull that up, or where exactly it's defined. And I also have the display overridden. So I have this script here. I'll pull that over here. So this is the BB editor. The game's called Breach Buddies. So this is basically the editor settings, which not only sets up a lot of this stuff, but it also sets up a lot of this drop-down menu. So, of course, I have a lot of quick functions which I might need to do, like, various different things, like run the game, open the game, whatever. But these are also bound, by the way, to keystrokes. I'm sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. So, yes, I have the BB editor script, but then I also have this thing here, which is the scriptable SO, I guess, scriptable object editor. That's a dumb name. I don't know why I called it that. But what this does is it allows you to specify basically what the labels look like and have all these buttons set up just how I like it here. And that's been invaluable for me to get a little console. And then I told you earlier, but I have a re-import scripts function here, which if we could find it. So I have a re-import scripts function here, which is calling into my editor code. This is also in the menu item, and this is a little bit of a pro tip because it's not explained at all in the Unity documentation. But if you do a ampersand n within the menu item, that means whenever you push Alt and that key, it will automatically trigger the menu item. And you'll see that happens over here. So you can see how it says sort of Alt N on the right-hand side here. I didn't write that. I wrote the parentheses thing, but the one on the right-hand side was auto-generated because I had the Alt N. Oh, excuse me. Because I had the Alt N set up basically just with an ampersand here. So I actually don't know if there's a way to do like Control N, or maybe it's like maybe there's another special character like this, or like this, or like this. I'm not really sure. I haven't been able to find one. So if you're aware of that, I'd love to know. But I find that's really useful. However, I don't push Alt N to reload the scripts. Instead, what I do is I have that rebound to. I'll show you my keyboard for a second. So if I hold up my keyboard, on the right-hand side, I have written in, you might be able to see that, maybe not, the cameras, it says import scripts, and then the bottom one says build. So I have, I think this is a plus button on my keyboard, on the numpad is re-import, and this one's build. And I'm honestly never using the plus and minus symbol part of that keyboard, so that's why I rebound those specific keys. And then I come in here, I make an edit to the script, I push import basically, so I just push this. It'll auto import my scripts whenever I'm done with the change. And then I push the other one for build, and I push that, and it will auto execute the build. So that's what that looks like. And then I also have the build function overridden, so that as soon as it's done building, it will open the executable, and additionally, it will open up the scene. So I'm working on a game that's multiplayer, so it's very common that I want to make a change, run the game, and see it happen, not with just the local editor, but also with a client. And so that helps me a lot with doing that functionality. Basically, I push build, I go to YouTube or something, and then as soon as it's done, I have both of those ready to play the game and see some interactions. So that's been really helpful for me as well. And it's fairly quick. So here, we're going to be able to see that now. This is another thing which I'll talk about in a second. But whenever I run the game in the editor, it auto opens my logbook. So I have a logbook which I edit every time I come to sit down and work on the game. And it will pop open in Sublime. I push reload. And then I can start writing in my latest entry. So I could say, you know, what am I working on right now? And the nice thing about that is I don't have to sign off. So I'm starting at, right now it's a 1:30-ish. And so it goes in half-hour increments. So it's assuming I'm going to be working until at least 2. But let's say I keep working on it and then I run the game at 2:05. If I run the game at 2:05, it will automatically go into this logbook and just change 2 to 2:30. So it just automatically increments it based on when it sees me interacting with the editor, which is all triggered through pushing the play button. So every now and then I'll be working on a script and I won't push the play button at all. However, then it will just, you know, catch up at the intermediate time. The only issue would be, I guess, if I'm editing the scripts and then I close the computer and I'm done for the night. But almost always I'm like going to test my change. So whenever you push the play button, it checks whether or not the latest log entry is updated. And that's been really helpful. There's a lot of things I want to do with this metadata that I've collected now since I've been constantly logging my work. I would love to, you know, determine what time of the week is most effective for me, how long certain deliverables and aspects of the project take, etc., etc. So there's definitely, I'd like to do a lot there with expanding this tool, but that's certainly an important part of my workflow. And so here's the game. It just launched these 2 games. I wanted to show you another thing, though, which was actually really hard to set up, and that is very common with you know, for example, when I'm working on Call of Duty, that comes up all the time, right? You want to tile the displays. So if you're working with multiple clients, it can get really annoying if the windows are overlapping. So I've set this up where if I put a 4 in here and then I push open games, it will launch the games and then it will automatically tile them to different coordinates of the screen. As you can see here, that was a pain in the ass to set up, very difficult. But if you're interested in the code, I could show it to you. It's so when I push open game, it does a delayed open. So basically every 0.2 seconds, it will open up a new one until we reach the 4 we want to open. And then it basically just builds the executable. That's it. Then once the actual game runs, one of my game logic scripts here called the MultiClient Arrangement. Let's see if we can get that open. It's loading. This MultiClient Arrangement script will edit a file. Now I could not for the life of me find a way to like I basically wanted each time I ran the game, I wanted it to have an index modulo 4 to determine where it should be in the grid. However, I have found that there was nothing I could reliably edit except maybe like if I put it on the server with the compare and swap feature that would allow me to increment the numbers without them overwriting each other. So that's why I have the 0.2 delay so that this guy can say, hey, I'm display number 1 before 0.2 seconds pass, and then the next guy can say, oh, I'm display number 2. If it all happens at once, then they all think they're display number 1. So that's why I have to add in that 200 millisecond delay. But what happens here is it determines what index it is. It, gets its resolution and the screen height. And then it just goes into a case based on what its index is, modulo versus the total, which is just constantly incrementing up and up and up. And then that's how it sets its position. Setting the window position is actually pretty difficult. But I was able to figure that out using some help from the Unity forums. So that is basically calling a Windows command, and apparently it only works for Windows. So thankfully I don't develop on a Mac. I don't know anyone who does. But if you were crazy, then I guess you'd also be in a bad spot. So that is how that window position works out. So that script is really useful for me. I really appreciate that. So I wanted to talk a little bit. So that's mostly about the editor setup. I wanted to talk now a little bit about just the game setup and what it looks like within the actual scene. So within my scene, I have the persistent game logic prefab, which is going to be in every single scene that I work in, and it's going to carry around a lot of the services that I'm going to need to call frequently. So that includes this thing, the global manager, which handles scene transitions, the sound manager, which self-explanatory, service locator. This is the standard service locator pattern that I've covered in previous videos. I've spruced this up a little bit just to reduce the amount of text it takes. So in my previous service locator, it actually took a lot of text to get from one service to another, but this one's actually very fast. Let me see if I could find it. So here's what it looks like now. So it's service locator dot, and it calls a static class, a static method, excuse me, called get service, and then you just type in the type of service you want. It'll automatically do a game object dot find objects of type lookup, or if it's already found it, it'll cache it. So it's very efficient, and it's at that point you can call whatever methods you want onto that game object. So this little service locator dot get service is a godsend. I think I was insane trying to have a serialized field for every single different service and cross-communicate that. Honestly, in a singly threaded environment, which Unity is, you're not going to have these multi-threaded collision issues. It seems a no-brainer to use this versus some sort of dependency injection framework. It's just so much cleaner to work with. I am a disciple, an acolyte, an apostle of whatever church this comes from, because I love this system so much. So that's what that looks like for scene transitions. And then, yeah, so this persistent game logic is basically just in the different scenes. What else is there to say? And then if I wanted to switch scenes, so I could push this button, jump over to my other scene, you'll see that there's a persistent game logic there also. So one of the things that's important is I might be doing some editing in this scene, but the networking flow, like the login flow for, I have Photon as my backend for multiplayer support. It requires me to go to the main menu and sign in. Now that is a problem, of course, if I'm working in this scene and I want to just push play. And oh wow, what a pain in the ass it would be to have to transition scenes every time I wanted to play, right? Because I think that is one of the biggest noob to pro differences I've seen in Unity is just, you know, the noob will go in here and he'll be editing the canvas. So he'll have his canvas open like this. He'll be editing it. And then when he wants to push play, he'll turn it off and then he'll push play. You know, he has to go through that extra step of setting it all up to push play. Whereas I think in a fully automated environment, which is what I'm striving for always, it'll just close any displays that should be closed at the start of game and start up as need be. And that's exactly what I have here with the scene management, where I think it might be done in this class. It might be this one. Yeah. So it will check, you know, hey, the game just started up. What scene are we in? Is that the main lobby? And if it's not, make the transition. I'm pretty sure. So that happens somewhere here. I'm not exactly sure where in the code it happens. But that's super useful because I could be in this scene, right? So we're in house.unity right now. I push play. And then swish. We will relocate, and now we're in the lobby. And then we can go through the login flow. So I have an automated login flow. It's actually broken right now, so that's something I need to work on. But if I push these checkboxes, it's broken right now, so bear with me. But it will automatically go to the front end menu, push login, and then push ready, and then wait for somebody else to queue in, and then push start, which is, again, it's exactly the same flow that we have in Call of Duty. And it's super useful because that way you can have your clients just automatically queue in with you, and you only have to worry about one client at a time rather than trying to manage switching between 3 different windows, getting everybody queued up, logged in, setting their usernames, etc. You want to have that all automated to whatever degree you can. And then at some point, I'm going to pursue what I'm not up to yet, but is certainly supported in other engines I've worked in, like Call of Duty or Fortnite, where they have headless clients, where there's basically no GUI display because you don't need it for that, right? In this case, though, I'm doing so much visual work, it's often useful to have both. But it's another thing to keep in mind as we move forward. So what else is there to talk about? So I talked a little bit about the scene setup. Oh, there was one more thing I wanted to mention, but I forgot what it was. Oh, so here it is. So let's say I'm running the game. So I'll just pop open one game right now. And runtime debugging is something that gets talked about all the time, and for good reason, right? It's very important. The relevancy being, if you are in a built executable and you want to get a call stack and all that stuff, it could be very hard because you don't have the built-in tools that you have with Visual Studio. Now, I was having a pain in the ass with this. It wasn't working at all, but I finally got my 2019 Visual Studio updated or whatever needed to happen so that I can actually go into here and do debug, attach Unity debugger, and then it actually will join the executable player. So I have that working now. It wasn't working for a while, but the issue even then is it's not always going to work, right? And this has particularly plagued me in, again, I've been working in Unity for over 5 years now, and a lot of that work has been on mobile. And with mobile, you often don't have access to the runtime debugger, or you might have an issue. Even with desktop, you might have an issue on one of your players' computers, and you want to be able to access that crash log or review information to as much detail as you can. So having really great runtime debugging tools is super important, even if they're just encapsulated within the client itself. And so I have a menu here for that, which is very extensible, and I plan to add to it considerably. But right now I've only got 4 different buttons here, but these each do something. So the first one is the log, self-explanatory. It just tracks everything that gets logged to the console, which is essential. You need to have a runtime console display when you're working in Unity for sure. You need to be able to see what logs are happening and see the stack traces for your exceptions, assuming the client doesn't completely crash. I don't think this button is working. Oh, it is. It is working. So if you push that button, it'll automatically, it's still pointing to the Do Animal stream. That's the last game I worked on. It's still pointing to the wrong help email address. But it looks like it is attaching all of my logs, which is awesome. So putting a little button in there, so if I'm working with a play tester, they run into an issue, I say, hey, pop open the log menu by pushing tilde and push the send email button, send those logs over to me. Super useful so I can ascertain what the issue is for them. And that goes even for a single player game. The other thing here is just, this is called room props. This is specific to multiplayer development, but it's really useful to see what are the server settings for my current room. And so this is basically just telling me, well, here I could show this. I think this will work. Let me see. Try a live demo. So if I log into a room here, fix this. Yeah, so if I log into a room, it's going to show me all of the different room occupants. And that's very important to be able to pull the server and ask what the server can see with respect to who's inside of a room or maybe what health people have, because obviously you could see right now that I'm the only client in this room. Maybe we'll have this guy join me. So now there's 2 in the room. And if I go over here, you'll see that this guy's here and now this new entry's here. But again, sometimes what you see is not the reality, right? So it's important to have a way to check what the server is seeing and to kind of get a server view in some sense. That way you can, ascertain whether or not your issue is actually, hey, this guy didn't enter the room on the server, or, oh no, it's just a visual issue. I'm not correctly rendering him even though the server does think he's there. Or an issue I faced recently was somebody left the room, so I didn't see them on the server, but they were still visually represented on the client. So the client wasn't getting that information for the display. So again, you want to just have visibility into both sides of the picture there so you can understand that. The next thing, I worked actually a pretty good amount on this tool. I don't know if we're in a clean build right now. Let's see if we can get into the game. Things might crash. Let's see how we're doing. Did it load? What happened there? Start game. Okay, it looks like the game is running. Okay, cool. So what I wanted to show you is it's frequently inside of my editor. I might want to go into a game object and look at some specific things, right? So I have some objects here that will go to the player avatar, and I could pop in here and I can look at his, skin renderer and look at all the children here and see which ones are enabled or disabled and things like that. But this is actually very hard to do in runtime because we don't have there's no way to basically attach the Unity editor to a runtime exe. You do have the way, as I showed you with Visual Studio, you could do a runtime debugger in the coding and the scripting, but you can't actually do that for an editor layout. So that's a little bit frustrating. I'm not aware of any way to do that. But I have this system here which can actually visualize the scene hierarchy in a text format. So for example, I can say, look for all the objects that have an avatar in the name, and it'll say, okay, we found these objects in the scene. And then I might say, oh, okay, I'm interested in the local player avatar. And so I don't have to type it in. It's just showing us option 6. So I go in here, I push 6, and it automatically selects that one and zooms in here, at which point I can, basically I'm looking at this game object, which is, it's not this exact game object, but it's the equivalent for the other player. And so it's within this game object, I can see what are the sister game objects, I can see what are the parents, what are the children. Maybe I want to look at the avatar skin, so I'm going to push 10, and then we'll zoom in on the avatar skin. I can see that it has a skinned mesh renderer, that it is currently active, and that it has one material called the green player instance. So that is I mean, that's amazing. That has helped me so much, right? Just having that little tool for runtime debugging. Very useful. And then the last element here is basically I can just enter in some numbers, and then I can, in the executable, ask to pull whatever the user input is from this debug menu. So I haven't really expanded upon that too far just yet, but as I get into tuning the weapons and stuff, it's going to be valuable for me in case I'm running a play test and I want to, change some values on the fly. These kind of input field setup is going to allow me to do that. So I'm excited about that possibility as well. Okay, so I talked a little bit about all that stuff. What else is there to discuss? Yeah, so I mean, I really do enjoy hanging out with Unity. I think there's a lot of areas where I also get pissed off for sure. This issue was happening to me a lot recently. It's just like a Unity bug. They haven't fixed it. If you could see that there's this render, right, that I'm using to, it's basically my own mesh that I'm using to see the light. It's like the guy's flashlight. If you could see, it's like his FOV. And for some reason, when I change the aspect ratio, I can get it small enough. I don't know if this is going to work. Doesn't look like it is working. But for whatever reason, for this aspect ratio, if it gets into a vertical layout, and it's not working for the editor, but it does work for the other guy, the mesh just doesn't render for some reason. It's such a weird bug. But I looked it up online and people said basically there's no fix, and you're going to run into that issue a lot with Unity of just like shit that's broken, has been forever, and always will be, It is what it is, to some degree. But what I found really useful for that was a script I found online, and this is actually really nice, which I call the aspect ratio enforcer. And this aspect ratio enforcer basically, when you have, this is specifically for standalone on Windows, but it will basically ensure that the Windows stays at that aspect ratio, because this is important, because you can, in your build settings, player settings preferences, you can set the aspect ratio to 16:10, for example. Let me see where I have that. Here it is, the ratio. So you can say, yes, I want it to only be supported in 16:10. But the problem is, as soon as you check resizable window, the player can resize it to not be 16:10 dimensions. So that's a pain in the ass, of course. If you want it to always be 16:10 and they can resize it, you want them to make it bigger and smaller, but still be 16:10. And Unity doesn't, for God knows why. They don't have a way to, they actually don't have a support for that. So you have to custom implement that by one way or another. And that's exactly what that script does. So if I make this smaller, you'll see that I can't make it just vertically smaller or just horizontally smaller. It'll automatically size the aspect ratio according to always being 16:10. And that's very important for Unity visual layouts, etc., etc. So just another useful script that I wanted to call out. I didn't write this. Somebody else did. Maybe he credited himself here. No, he didn't. But you'll find it online if you search for that stuff. Because, yeah, you know how it is. Just lots of stuff. Lots of random stuff in Unity that, like, it just doesn't support. So thankfully, somebody somewhere hopefully built some guide for it. Like, I remember that happened to me recently with the terrain editor, where Unity has a terrain editor, but you can't subdivide the mesh. So that happened to me where we were in a situation where we wanted to add dynamic occlusion, and one of the biggest draw call issues was this terrain, this huge ass terrain mesh, which was basically one big mesh across the whole map, and we wanted to subdivide that so we could dynamically occlude certain sections based on where you were in the map, because you didn't need to render the terrain on the other side of the cliff or of the whatever. However, there's no way in Unity to subdivide the terrain, so I had to find a third-party tool, and thankfully I was able to, that did exactly that. So you're gonna run into those issues all the time with Unity. Your experience may vary. And I think that's it. So I think that's most of the stuff I wanted to talk about here. There's a lot more videos on the way. This one's pretty laid back. It's not a tutorial in a sense. It's more just a conversation talking about some of the stuff that's been difficult for me and some of the ways I've overcome the problems. Though I'm still facing a lot for sure. One of the biggest issues, you may know this. This might be a real noob thing. I'm not sure, but whenever I want to edit a prefab, um, with the new prefab system that rolled out, I think in 2018 or maybe 2019, which I love. I think the nested prefab stuff is very important. I remember back when I was working at NCSoft, we had a third-party plugin for nested prefabs that was a pain in the ass, frankly. And nested prefabs probably always will be a pain in the ass, but it's nice that we have native or official support, whatever you want to call it. But the issue here is that I would love to, like, let's say I want to make this change here. It basically forces me to open the prefab and do it here. But the issue is when I go into here, this prefab doesn't have a visual component, so it's not a good example. Maybe this one does actually. So this one, the debug UI. This one looks pretty good, but it's often the case that like when it goes into this special scene just for whatever prefab it is, I have a lot of difficulty visualizing the edit. And I would love to be able to, drag this up here, drag this down there. And instead of right here, it's like, oh, do you want to open the prefab? Instead of opening the prefab, I just want like a way, if I make the change, to just say, no, this change is definitive. Change the prefab as I've just requested, and then override all other changes, because this is the end all be all. This is exactly what I want to do. And I realize why they did that. They did it so that you have to be very explicit about working on the prefab itself rather than working on an instance of the prefab. But in a case like this, I actually don't have a divergence from one scene to another with respect to how the prefab is set up. It's exactly the same. I don't have the prefab edited in any way. Maybe the name of the game object, that's it, but that's not saved anyways. So it'd be nice if I could, if I didn't have to go into that separate prefab screen and just have the change apply immediately, so I don't always get this pop-up, which is always a pain in the ass. That's for example an issue that I'm facing, very specific, but it's certainly giving me some gripe, some pain. All right, so that's it. I'd love to know what you folks are doing differently with your editors, what advice you have. Maybe something that you are using today. For example, with the re-import scripts for me, that's essential for me today, but I didn't realize just how much I needed it before I had it implemented. So I'd love to know things like that, because there's probably a lot of things I'm doing that are just inefficient or could give me a lot of relief if I knew, the one quick fix, as they like to say. So that's going to wrap it up for now. I have more tutorials which I'd love to make for you folks on more specific subject areas. I'm going to be looking into one on serialization and encryption, and then just a variety of other stuff related to this game and other, projects that I make for the sake of education and teaching stuff. So that's it for now. Thanks so much for your comments and support on the channel. And if there's any particular topic you'd like me to cover in the future, definitely let me know in the comments down below. Thanks.